Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Danielle Bitterman. I'm a radiation oncologist at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. I'm also clinical lead for data science and AI at Mass General Brigham. And I am thrilled to welcome you all today to hear from our amazing panelists on AI Diagnostics, is the future of diagnostics moving in silico. So for decades, basically as long as we've been practicing medicine, diagnostics have been rooted in a fairly familiar process. We collect individual data modalities, it can be from blood tests, imaging, EEGs, and then interpret each oftentimes manually and individually to reach a clinical decision. But we're now entering a new era where computational approaches can generate insights and maybe even completely new types of diagnostics that guide patients' care. So today we're going to hear some amazing innovators in this space to explore how AI-driven diagnostics, the state of AI-driven diagnostics today, and where we're going in the future. And I have to say, as a physician, I am so excited about the potential of AI-driven diagnostics. When I have a patient, I always say, I wish I had a crystal ball and I can tell you what's going on and how you're going to respond to a given therapy so we can personalize each treatment as much as possible. And right now we don't have a crystal ball, but hopefully as these technologies advance, we're going to get closer and closer to that vision so we can take care of each patient according to their exact goals of care and meet every patient's needs. So again, our panel brings together experts at the forefront of this transformation. And so hopefully you're all going to help us understand not just what's possible today, but what the future holds as diagnostics increasingly incorporates digital data. So with that, let's dive in. And I'd like to start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves and let us know the unique perspective and expertise you're going to bring to this panel. And so we'll just go down the line and we can start with you, Andy.
Great. I'm Andy Beck, the CEO and co-founder at Path AI. And my perspective, I've been in the laboratory business my whole career. I'm trained as a pathologist, and for about 20 years now, have been working to develop technologies in digital pathology and AI. So very much bring the anatomic pathology and laboratory perspective.
I'm Jacob Donahue. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Beacon Biosignals, a precision neurotechnology company very much inspired by the wave that's ushering forward precision medicine oncology to leverage neurophysiology and machine learning to characterize diseases of brain function. So as a physician scientist by training, very excited about the opportunities to bring these insights to actually stratify patients and think about ways to bring new care paradigms forward.
I'm Connie Lehman. I'm professor of radiology at Harvard and breast imager at Mass General Brigham, and founder of Clarity, AI company that is really focused on being able to predict a woman's breast cancer 5 years before it occurs. And so we're really applying the power of AI and computer vision to move beyond detection and diagnosis and move into the domain of prediction. And once we can predict, we can prevent. And so I'm really excited to be here and also share experiences as a physician scientist moving from the research and the science to bring it out to women globally through a commercial pathway.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jay Rugani. I'm a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, and I'm going to be sharing the investor perspective with you all today. Andreessen Horowitz is a technology venture capital firm based in Silicon Valley. And I represent the firm on boards of a number of AI-based companies in healthcare life sciences, including companies like Velar Labs, which is building an AI-based oncology precision diagnostic platform, companies like In Citro, which are developing an AI-based therapeutic development platform, as well as companies like Counsel Health, more on the healthcare side, that are using AI tools to help clinicians see more patients and provide better care around the clock. So thank you for the time.
I'm David Spetzler. I'm a mathematician and molecular cellular biologist by training. I'm the president of Caris Life Sciences, and we are a genomics company doing whole exome, whole transcriptome sequencing on cancer patients, both in tissue and blood, and then leveraging that data set in the creation of AI-based signatures to predict therapeutic response.
Wonderful, thank you. So obviously we're going to have a lot of really important perspectives weighing in today. And I forgot to mention in the introduction, you can enter questions for the panel into the app, and I'll see it here and we'll ask, and then we'll also leave time at the end for some in-person question answering. So let's start with our first question. In big picture, where are you seeing AI diagnostic tools shaping patient care today? And I'll just start with Andy, but let's, this is a conversation, so please kind of bounce ideas off of each other.
Sure. I mean, maybe starting from the lab side, which, diagnostics coming out of the lab account for something or impact something like 70 to 80% of medical decisions. So it's a relatively small specialty within healthcare with the sole focus of making the definitive diagnosis and really guiding downstream care. So while in other specialties there's sort of a clinical impression or radiologic impression, kind of the data coming out of pathology is often considered the ground truth and the standard for future therapy. So it's one where it's so important to get it right. And we're seeing applications of AI, I'd say, in two big areas, kind of the two big divisions within pathology: clinical pathology, which is largely blood work, where every case in pathology you're starting with unstructured tissue coming from the patient that you somehow have to convert to a ground truth objective diagnosis. And on the blood side, we already have and have had for many years, I would say, technologies for reading that and turning it into structured data. So there, a lot of the AI is taking the sort of structured data and looking for trends over time, or looking how can we predict different clinical phenotypes from seemingly unrelated clinical laboratory tests. That's, I'd say, one big area. The other big area of pathology, which I think in a way is even more interesting the way AI is now being applied and the work we do at Path AI, is anatomic pathology, where a big chunk of tissue is taken out of a patient, put on a glass slide, and it's really historically been entirely the human's job to look at this unstructured image and to convert it into an objective diagnosis. So in a sense, the human physician has been doing this core task of translating unstructured data to diagnosis, and now we can use AI to do that, to take in these images, in certain cases link it with clinical data and produce diagnoses. So we're seeing it across the laboratory, but I think the biggest advances in the last 5 years have been really in this image-based work in anatomic pathology, and we're starting to see many algorithms to increase efficiency, increase accuracy, as well as to better predict clinical outcomes.
Go ahead,
I actually love that because I totally agree. I think it's the ability to leverage computer vision and AI to have pattern recognition that the human eye and the human brain can't process. And so whether it's the slides in your labs with pathology or all the images of the human body, these principles and the rapid speed at which computer vision is enhancing is going to allow us to really leverage the full potential of digital data within the images. And there's so many different ways of thinking about images of the body in the medical sciences. So it's moving at a rapid pace, and it's incredibly exciting, the power of the image that we haven't fully realized, because we have, as Andy said, depend on a very limited ability of the human to extract meaningful data from images.
So it sounds like, there's this fine line and almost merging of being able to say, this is the ground truth, this is what's really happened to the patient, and being able to predict, because we're going to be able to take so much more information out of the data that we're already collecting. Amazing. Anyone else have, I guess, Jay, what are you seeing in the commercial world?
Yeah, I mean, from a lot of the clinicians that I speak with, I think they'll tell you that they are overwhelmed by the pace of medical innovation, and it's extraordinarily difficult, increasingly difficult to keep up with the advances. That's a good thing, by the way. That means that medicine is progressing fast. And that comes with a set of tools, whether it's sort of more general large language models or more specific AI-based algorithm-based diagnostics that help us see what's very difficult to see. Or parse through what's very difficult to parse through in a 15-minute physician visit. And so it's hard not to be optimistic about the pace at which AI and other based software tools are going to help clinicians see more patients, care for more patients, see things that are difficult to see, and so that leaves us very active from an investment perspective.
There's also a big opportunity in things like cancer of unknown primary, where humans are unable to figure out what is actually going on. And the AI's ability to diagnose those patients is pretty amazing. And so there are specific disease indications where it's absolutely mandatory to have an AI because humans can't do the work today.
Great, and you all touched on this a little bit, and I think one thing that there is some anxiety, I think just questioning about is where will humans fit in this loop? So maybe you could speak a little bit to kind of, what the current status quo is, and moving forward, is AI gonna, it's a little bit cliche, is AI gonna replace clinicians? If not, what is the diagnostician's job going to be in the future? Jake, do you wanna comment?
Yes, I think in ours, we look at waveform data from sleep EEGs, a 1D image, if you will, where, as folks talked about, there's a lot of signal to be able to be extracted and then interpreted. And so very much like a pathology slide, there needs to be currently a human in the loop. And we see a future where we get increasing amounts of data. Now the opportunity to get multiple nights of data to interpret features, not just of what's the primary use case around sleep apnea, but novel neurodiagnostic opportunities. And it's clear that making sure that you get the incentives aligned, where you have the ability to be paid, even if it's a small amount, of reimbursed for that professional component on top of the technical component, so you are supporting these providers. And it feels more like that there will not so much a replacement, but the efficiency of a clinician that'll be able to utilize these AI tools will be massively impacted.
And I guess to the panel, do you see pushback from clinicians and healthcare institutes specifically about this concern of, this existential concern of replacement or taking over human physician, or is it more of an ethos of we're really going to augment and make the most of the data and our personnel?
I think in the imaging sciences, we've definitely evolved rapidly. Early on, certainly, there was the, will we be replaced, and there was a lot of fear, but we rapidly moved to understanding that the future radiologists, must integrate AI into our work and seeing the advantages of that. And we have so many stories from our own history on where we can see where that's needed. So in 1998, the FDA authorized the first CAD detection, CAD diagnosis software applied to mammograms. And by 2002, CMS approved payment for that. Adoption really rapidly increased, but then 10 years after it was out being used, hundreds of millions of dollars every year being paid for that, with the radiologists either accepting or rejecting those marks. So very much in the pathway of the radiologist still has that final word. So 10 years later, we published a very large study in JAMA Internal Medicine showing this actually isn't helping patients. It's not improving the diagnosis of the mammogram. It is not improving the sensitivity or the specificity, and radiologists who worked in some practices with CAD and others without actually found fewer cancers when they worked with CAD. And so that really gave us pause. Now you fast forward, all of the AI that's now being developed through many of these pathways, people have learned a lot from that. The reader studies that didn't translate over. The importance of teaching humans how to use the AI assistance. So it's not just this will automatically be helped with the radiologists involved. And then also, just this May, for the first time, FDA has authorized in the imaging sciences a domain where the radiologist isn't involved, and this is our risk prediction model, where we can take the mammogram, predict a woman's future risk of breast cancer going out 5 years. There is no radiologist accepting or rejecting it because I can't do that as a radiologist. So it's a domain where we're using AI to do things that humans can't do. And again, that's empowering us as radiologists to be more effective in how we take care of our patients and how we triage them appropriately for more intensive screening and less intensive screening. So I think that evolution has actually been very rapid, and the more we're seeing these proof of principle demonstrations, the more comfort there is.
It's really, go ahead.
Yeah, I also think the human replacement question, the job loss question with technology is one as old as time, And I would actually argue that healthcare is one of the industries that should be least worried about job dislocation. And the reason is simple supply and demand. So if you look at the supply side, healthcare in the last year became the largest employer. 23.5 million people work in the healthcare industry. It's the largest employer relative to any other sector of the economy. And then on the demand side, it feels like the demand for care just continues to rise. So we now spend more on healthcare than we do on housing or groceries. It's almost 20% of our economy. And the care, the sort of demand for care continues to go up over and over again. And yet when you look at sort of the supply side constraints that exist today, there was a Bain study a couple of years ago that showed that over 50% of care teams feel like, over 50% of clinicians feel like their care teams are understaffed. And so clearly there's this enormous supply-demand mismatch in healthcare. And you have an opportunity for AI across the board to augment clinician work. I think we're a long way away from needing to deal with significant job dislocation given the supply-demand mismatch that we have in healthcare.
Yeah, that's super
Although
helpful
I'd say
perspective.
there is some pushback in terms of when it's a black box solution. So kind of going in and understanding what is the biological root of the AI's decision is really important if you want to increase the adoption rate. So there's definitely fear of, I don't understand this, and so I don't know if I can trust it. And it's incumbent upon us to shine a light into that black box and explain as much as we possibly can about why these calls are being made.
Yeah, this question of trust is going to be really important to figure out. Maybe kind of the panelists can talk about how they think about how we can engender trust as these AI models continue to advance and become increasingly difficult to kind of interpret and understand what's going on.
Sure, happy to take that. I think rigorous clinical validation, nothing beats that, as well as upstream of that rigorous analytic validation. So a lot of sort of the principles of trusting any technology in healthcare apply, I think, very directly to this set of tools, and we just have high hope that these sets of tools are going to be much more performant than previous. So it should be, in a way, even easier, let's say, to gain trust because you can publish such strong validation data. And then, having people use them, try them out in a trial setting before they actually apply it in clinical practice, and of course getting regulatory clearance and working with regulators on this. These are all components that will engender trust, but I think sort of taking those tried and true principles of test performance characteristics and using the tools and getting away from broad, general, not particularly useful tools, even like AI, which is such a broad term. It's almost like saying, this tool has math incorporated into it, or this tool uses electricity. We should have as little interest or excitement over that as we do with those tools. And you should really, the proof is in the pudding. Use it, and if it works, people will trust it, and if it doesn't work, people won't. I think physicians do have quite a bit of experience trying out new tools, and these, I would say, fall in a similar paradigm.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I actually like the expressions you're using. Our patients, they're not organic chemists, but they trust us when we're making recommendations about medications that we think, because of the data, because of the research, because of the science. I also think we have a lot of work to do, as Andy's pointing out, in just educating around language and how we, as the physician community, how comfortable we are with artificial intelligence and how it can be applied. And then also, I think I just bring it back to the personal story. I mean, one of my most common experiences when I'm sharing with a woman that her pathology has come back and she has a breast cancer diagnosis is, how can that be? No one in my family has ever been diagnosed with breast cancer. And we know that that's true of 85% of women diagnosed with breast cancer. If we only use our genetic mutations to identify these women at high risk, we're going to capture less than 10%. If we add into it patients with a family history, we'll bring that up to 15%. So that leaves 85% with sporadic breast cancers. And so that lack of trust and that uncertainty, we start to shift over to identifying these women earlier, having them have that experience of having their risk identified earlier and their cancer detected earlier, and that combined with the research where this can be demonstrated, the education of referring providers and patients, and then the patient experience itself, as those stories continue to grow, I think there's that shift in trust and engagement, because many women are not trusting in the system now that mammography is the best way for them to be screened, or that they can trust the system telling them what's the best pathway to make sure that we can either detect early or prevent your breast cancer. So we would like to make part of that education showing how this actually should increase their trust and increase their confidence in the process.
I'd say another really important thing is the validation, as has been mentioned. And so there's a big difference between having an AI that has an evolving interpretation versus a locked model. And in healthcare, it's probably right to use locked models where we know things aren't drifting. And going through and being really, really sure that we're not picking up correlation instead of causation. And so one of the big challenges in AI, especially with the amount of data that we're generating now, is being deceived by correlation when we're looking for causation. And one of the great examples of this is if you look at the number of letters in the winning spelling bee word in the Scripps National Spelling Bee, the correlation to the number of deaths to venomous spiders is a 0.98. And these types of spurious events are happening all the time. It's why we see the hallucinations in all the big large language models. And so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we're avoiding those situations as much as possible.
So you touched on one of my favorite topics, data and data quality. And so there's a lot of excitement about all the fancy algorithms, but kind of at the practical level where there's a lot of room, I think, to grow is how do we move data safely? How do we standardize data so that we have an AI-ready ecosystem at the hospitals, so that, and to care for our patients? Jake, do you want to comment on how you think through that?
Yeah, I can touch on that and how we think it ties to sort of next generation paradigms. And we definitely won't belabor the interoperability and the ways that data fragmentation. I think probably Jay sees a new deck every week for the past decade of new ways of making it more efficient. But in our case, I think we're doing something, we're very much, again, inspired by what's the other panelists here on the stage, that we have, in looking at neurophysiology, and so we believe that sleep is an active brain state. And so to decode what's going on in human sleep and what's going on for brain health, we need to build novel neurodiagnostic tools. We use this lens of measuring brain waveform data at night during this state that's correlated to disease, part of DSM criteria for psychiatry, and causally potentially linked to neurodegenerative disease. To circle back, building new diagnostic tools ultimately relies on the right outcome data to link these new biomarkers that we discovered towards. And so I think where it's potentially easier to understand how to split the Kaplan-Meier curve in some of these other use cases, in diseases of the brain, it can be challenging to know what is an early loss of cognition. And so I think it's one of the important trends that we're very excited by is that the ability to utilize data tokenization frameworks to build the rest of the claims data ecosystem around, so that when we discover a biomarker like REM behavior disorder, a patient that during REM sleep, instead of being paralyzed normally, you see hypertonia and muscle movement. As opposed to that being a static finding, we can now go into the claims data and see that 7 years later, that patient may get a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. It really unlocks a lot of these opportunities to do the predictive analytics. So I think bringing together these novel data sources is going to be really important for neuroscience.
Thank you. And just as a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, we will have an open question answer, but you also can enter it into text it into the app, and we'll be able to ask it here. My next question is for Jay. How are current payment and reimbursement models influencing development and investment in this space? And where would you like to see this improve in the future?
Yeah, this is a fun question. So there is a lot of discussion in the sort of regulatory and reimbursement communities today around how to approve and how to pay for AI-based diagnostics. And let me sort of just steelman both sides. There's one side which is to say these diagnostic tests are entirely new, they're entirely different, therefore we need a bunch of new regulations to think about how we understand the safety and efficacy of these new diagnostics, how we, and effectively how we pay for them. And one conclusion that comes from that is, well, they're software-based, so the marginal cost is very low, even though they have very high development costs, and so they should be paid for at marginal cost. The other side of the argument, and you can guess where I sit, is the reality that though the how of the test is different, the what is very much the same, which is trying to understand some clinical question that will inform a clinical decision. And we have lots of diagnostic frameworks, both at FDA and CMS, to think about how we understand how we demonstrate the sort of validity of these tests and the safety and utility of these tests. What is really challenging for any sort of diagnostic startup is uncertainty. So I'm going to launch a new test, and I'm going to do all this work, I'm going to spend all this money, I'm going to raise all this capital, and I don't know not only whether or not I'm going to be approved, but I don't know if I'm even going to be approved at all, but certainly I don't know how I'm going to be evaluated. And that creates a lot of ripple effects. Then the primary one is investors run away. And I think we've basically got to ask ourselves as a society, do we think we need more diagnostic tools to help clinicians make excellent clinical decisions in routine patient care? And if we think that's important, then the next question that I think we've got to ask is, how do we encourage an ecosystem of companies that will come in and develop tests, will take risks, and will sort of run through the pathways that we set for them? In absence of that, complex regulations that are inconsistent basically favors the big guys. And so the current system, the complexity of regulations basically allow only the very large companies that have teams of lawyers and regulatory teams, regulatory folks that can sort of navigate these waters. And the broader sort of ecosystem of new diagnostics companies that are bringing really exciting new innovations to clinicians and patients basically won't be able to operate. And that is in my version of the world, I think that's a tragedy.
David, do you want to weigh in there too?
Yeah, so we've gone to payers and CMS lately with AI diagnostic tests, and it's kind of a tragedy, really. So we've got one particular AI-based test that predicts breast cancer early recurrence. There's a test already on the market that's reimbursed about $3,700. And when we approached them with this, we said, hey, look, we can actually cut your costs in half with this. But because it's a combination of AI on an image plus some next gen, it falls outside of any regulatory pathway that exists. And so they told us, it's great that we could save money, but you have to go through this 2-year process in order to even apply for reimbursement. And that's a pretty sad state of affairs, because I guess we do have an army of lawyers and regulatory people, and even with them, it's still a tremendously slow process. And that's unfortunate, because that's 2 years of lost opportunity for patients.
This is a related question from the audience. How do we ensure life-saving AI advances are made rapidly available to all, given the uncertainty and given that reimbursement often lags years? What are creative ways that you're thinking about, or that you think might be successful in the near future, so that we can start making progress now? And do you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think the first is the first part of that, the conditional statement, given life-saving AI. I mean, I think we still have a huge responsibility to build those and to provide the robust clinical evidence that not only does this increase accuracy or show a predictive strength, but also truly improves outcomes for patients. I mean, I think that's the most important and the first piece. And then I think it's important to, as much as possible, leverage technologies that are already ubiquitous. I mean, one thing AI can do that I think we've heard from everyone on the panel is to generate new insights from existing technologies. So look for technologies that are already globally available, particularly in resource-limited parts of the world. And then AI is also globally available through the global availability of cloud computing. So I think if you sort of think with the end state in mind, that you want something that's leveraging already ubiquitous technologies, that the onus is really on the developer to prove that this actually is a life-saving technology and not a nice to have, but one that will really impact clinical care. And then, yeah, working closely from the beginning with regulators and payers so that they're prepared for it. And I do think if one does all those things early on, there's a high probability of success.
I really want to echo that. That's the pathway that we chose. So, the screening mammogram is ubiquitous, so we're not going to be looking at, a 7T MRI scanner to have a different way of finding cancer in a woman at average risk. That just doesn't make sense for access and value and opportunity. So you have something that's already ubiquitous, it's already there, it's stored in PACS systems all over the world, and then an application that can triage women for high and low risk in ways that we've never been able to do with traditional models that are largely dependent on family history and genetics. But then having to go, as your point is, to regulatory that's saying, well, we haven't had a model before. You absolutely have to be FDA regulated, and we haven't had a model before where you don't have the radiologist either accepting or rejecting the assessment. But a radiologist can't look at a mammogram to say if the woman is high or low risk. So working through that regulatory process, and we were a little bit like David and Goliath, we're a tiny company, and so being able to do that and have a de novo authorization pathway now really opens up the world for other images around the world that are ubiquitous. How can we use those? How can we leverage those? And really, make it a globally available product. The other flip side of the coin is, will this be globally available, is we have to pay a lot of attention to how we're building the models. It wasn't that long ago that the vast majority of AI models in healthcare were based on patients in California, New York, and Massachusetts. So are those going to work globally, if the data has been so restricted? So we, from the beginning, really wanted to make sure that we had geographic diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, age, breast density, all the different ways you can think about diversity from the beginning. So the entire ecosystem is for the product, for the access, for the delivery, and for the research and assessment.
Fabulous. Another question from the audience. With the increased confidence of AI-driven diagnostic information and similar progress in treatment options, how do we keep the patient at the center of the decision-making process and avoid the return of, an automated physician-God complex? Jake?
Well, the patient's always at the center of any diagnostic test because it's about them. So I don't know that having an AI interpretation is going to change that. It's probably more that the AI will allow the patient to be even more precisely at the center of the circle because we're able to see more about what's happening within their particular body and their particular disease to make more intelligent decisions around treatment. And that's kind of the promise of the AI. Talking about the reimbursement component of how these things are working, there's always downward pressure on diagnostic reimbursement. And so in all likelihood, what I think will happen is that if we can kind of fix that reimbursement cost, but let the AI continue to add value, then instead of prices coming down, prices can stay the same. It's very easily modeled by all the actuarials, and so it's easy enough to build that into the system without having runaway costs, because that's one of the biggest fears that we encounter is, well, if we start paying for this one AI, how do we know you're not going to have 30 AIs and now our cost has increased 30-fold? And that's something we're going to have to deal with in terms of what is the practical ceiling on how much we can afford to put into healthcare, because it's not infinite, and we have to think about that in our models.
And maybe just to add to that, because I totally agree with the answer, and I think this AI and digital can really be a truly enabling technology or set of technologies for patients. I mean, one in the pathology example, having access to digital images versus requiring glass slides that you somehow get from a lab and physically send glass slides. So being able to easily distribute the data. And then having access to all of these large language models like Gemini or ChatGPT or Anthropic, where the second you get the diagnosis, you can be like the most informed person in the world essentially for free by just like pasting in the report into one of those things and say, talk to me like I'm a 5-year-old and I want to know all the latest advances. I mean, this is absolutely incredible for patients. And then you imagine the AI doing a lot of the work that the physician used to have to do manually, which, something that may have used to take 15 minutes now might only take 1 minute. So hopefully they have a lot more time to actually be a thought partner with the patient and helping to work through with the patient. So I hope it frees up physician time for better engagement with patients, but even more so, I think it'll really empower patients to make the best use that they can of their data for their individual case.
Thank you. And we have time for some audience questions in person. I think if anyone has a question, maybe raise your hand. There's someone in back with a question.
Thank you. It's Matai Memon. This is for Jay. Hi, Jay. Wondering how you think about this. Like, if you assume some of the problems that have been discussed on the panel get solved over the next few years, that the utility of diagnostics using AI methodologies are accepted, they're paid for, and they're reimbursed. The question is, like, what happens after that? Like, if you go forward 5 years or so, is there a risk of commoditization as the algorithms kind of generally improve and data becomes more broadly available? Or do you think there's a proprietary element there that is protectable? As an investor, I'm wondering how you think about that horizon, and it'd be great for Andy to comment on that as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. So I'll answer the question 2 ways, like as a consumer and as an investor. So I think there are a lot of things that are very difficult that AI makes easy. Parsing through large swaths of information very quickly, seeing signals that are either very time-consuming for a human clinician to decipher or impossible for a human clinician to see with the naked eye, now become very easy to do in a lot of cases. And I think all of those tests should be developed, and I think as a consumer, that is awesome. And so that should happen very, very quickly. From there, then, the second part of his question is just about moat and defensibility. And I think it comes back to the businesses that do things that are very hard and very valuable for a lot of people should be rewarded. And regardless of my sort of investment portfolio, I think that is amazing for society. We should celebrate the businesses that do things that are very important and valuable and very hard for anyone else to do. And we should reward those, and the investors, the employees, the early partners that take a bet on those kinds of companies should be rewarded handsomely. And that profit, by the way, incentivizes more people to go work on hard problems that are important for people. And I think all the commodity technologies that should be commoditized, that can be commoditized, should be commoditized, including anyone in my portfolio. And I think that's a future of medicine that I'm excited for.
Yep, and just to add on that, I think some things that have been surprising to some in the field over time is that although we're sort of enamored by AI, like a lot of the AI-only pieces are the ones that are or will be the easiest to commoditize. I think certain prediction of drug response or certain outcome prediction that requires specialized data sets will be harder, but sort of general purpose models that can solve run-of-the-mill problems, which is the vast majority of what you see by definition. Other people can build those AI systems, but what any person working in this area knows who engineers products and wants to scale products globally is the distribution and actually integration into the clinical workflow of labs and health systems and pharma companies and translational research and clinical trials and companion diagnostics. That's actually very difficult. These are all different workflows with different regulatory requirements. and sort of seamlessly integrating the AI to optimize the user experience in each of those areas with two big customer bases, one being drug developers and the other being diagnostic labs and health systems, requires tremendous engineering over time and optimization of product, and then the ability to both monitor performance over time, as well as to continuously learn from user experience and data and when the system is working well and working poorly. So I think we've seen this in a lot of areas. You could say search was relatively easy to commoditize at some point, but the fact that Google had such wide distribution and was learning from each new search and had this two-way marketplace with advertising companies and with users gave them a legitimate moat. And I think we'll see something similar here. So in a way, the single point solution in AI may be easy to commoditize, but the whole ecosystem that's created by having a widely distributed, commercially used platform, I think will be quite difficult.
So we are at time, but I hope the audience just waits 1 minute because I want to do a lightning round. Everyone's only allowed to answer this question with one sentence. You can have a semicolon in your sentence. But if we meet again here in 2030, what do you hope we're going to be discussing about and debating about with respect to diagnostic AI? And we can go start with David and go down the line.
I think that we'll be debating the use of personalized drugs to treat diseases that we haven't defined based upon molecular aberrations that we never knew about.
I think we'll be talking about AI companions that the patient is using to inform their own medical decisions, and we'll be talking about how to regulate and pay for that.
I think it's going to be an exciting meeting. I think we're going to be talking about how we have really expanded our notion of detection and diagnosis to move beyond into prediction and prevention, and really moving into the phase where we are preventing disease from occurring because the early signals we can now identify with AI in a vast complexity of diseases.
Similar to Connie, I think imagining a world where we are taking neurodiagnostics 5-7 years before someone presents with symptoms and thinking about how do we pay for a very expensive therapy for somebody that is healthy.
I think we'll be talking about digital and AI is very ubiquitous in drug development, in diagnostics, in much of the world. But how do we access parts of the world that are totally underserved by physicians, where there's 20x fewer, say, pathologists per capita, and how do we distribute this expertise globally?
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for your expertise and insights, and thank you to the audience for hanging in for a few extra minutes, and I guess see you all in 2030. Thank you all.